Jane is one of the co-founders of a really important industry organisation, the Diversity Project. And we're going to be talking about that a little later. But to start off with, and to welcome Jane. Jane, it all begun in a comprehensive school in Rotherham.
Yeah.
Tell us about your early life.
Yeah, so my dad worked for the Coal Board, so we sort of floated around North Nottinghamshire and South Yorkshire. He was a scientist and a very analytical kind of guy. So I went to school in a perfectly ordinary comprehensive school in Rotherham. Was always regarded as a bit of a swot, and managed to get a place to Oxford to study politics, philosophy and economics, which was a bit of a shock to me and to my school, to be honest.
Why was that a shock, Jane? Because that you know, I went to a co-ed comprehensive school as well. Nobody in the school even went to university. So, you know, getting to Oxford must have been a real milestone in your life, and congratulations.
Well, yeah, it certainly was. Actually, my dad had won a place to Oxford from his grammar school in Bradford back in the 40s, but wasn't able to take it up because of the Second World War. So I was sort of fulfilling his dream as much as fulfilling mine, really. And it was a bit of a shock, you know. I was going from Rotherham is not a particularly privileged kind of town, particularly nowadays. Yeah, Oxford was a bit of a shock because I'm suddenly surrounded by lots of people who've had much more privileged backgrounds than I had, and dealing with lots of elderly white men who were the dons there, which was again a shock.
Yeah. How I mean, was it at that point that, you know, looking back, that diversity became or started to become a passion? Is that where the seed was sown, or was it sown somewhere else?
I suspect that sense of not really belonging, to start with anyway, probably did sow some seeds. It certainly made me more aware, I think, of when you fit in and when you don't feel as though you fit in. But I think the main seed probably was sown after I'd sort of started at London Business School. While I was at university, I decided that marketing sounded like an interesting career choice. And I applied for lots of marketing jobs. And in the end, I was offered two. One was with Eastern Gas, and the second was with the London Business School, marketing some of their financial services. And I didn't take the Eastern Gas job. I don't even know if they exist anymore, but anyway. So I joined London Business School to market these financial services, and that got me. I was a bit, as I say, I was a bit of a swot. So I did quite a lot of the finance courses there, and in the end turned it into doing an MBA there, because I found I'd got loads of course credits because I'd done the homework and taken the exams, etc. And I remember that the piece of the module that I remember most about was around organizational behavior. And we did a session on groupthink. And I think that really sparked a lasting, a lifelong interest in the benefits of diversity and why it's so important to have a range of different perspectives around the table when you take decisions. Mm-hmm. So that's probably where I really keyed into the topic.
Okay, and from there you went more into sort of the corporate world with Russell, and then Willis Towers Watson. What was life like on that side compared with, you know, sort of Oxford and the London Business School, which were more academic?
Yeah, I suppose both organisations, Russell and Watson's that I joined originally, were very research-driven organisations. They prided themselves on, really being really clever. And
Yeah.
so I've probably just moved from one academic environment into another, to be honest. I think that the difference was when I moved to Watson's, because back then, and this was in the sort of early 90s, it was still an actuarial partnership, and I'm not an actuary. I've dated actuaries, if I have to own up to that, but I'm not one. And that was a bit of a shock, because I was suddenly in an environment which was, well, it was all male, to be honest. There were no female partners at the time. I couldn't, when I joined, be a partner because I was a non-actuary, although the rules changed on that with the introductions of LLPs. I was surrounded by these mostly white men who'd all studied maths and were all very left brain. And I'm kind of left brain too, but it was a bit of a culture shock, I think.
And did you feel that culture shock, that looking up to this sort of grey white male leadership, did that put a fire in your belly, or did you think, this is my place and that's theirs? What was, and how were you treated as well? Were you treated differently?
I think I was treated like any other non-actuary. They used to joke about the sort of cowboys, and the investment team, which was made up of people with different backgrounds, to be fair, was seen a little bit as the cowboys in the organisation relative to the pensions actuaries, who were the purists.
Okay.
So I did have my tribe. I think you always need to have your tribe.
Yeah.
But I think, to be honest, I sort of just knuckled down and got on with it for the next maybe 10 to 15 years. But at some point, I then decided enough's enough. Things aren't changing as fast as they need to. I saw the lack of diversity with the clients I advised, because I was working with trustee boards, almost all of them white, elderly men. With the asset managers that I was researching, most of the portfolio managers were white men. And then in my own organisation, I saw a lack of diversity there. So I kind of put myself forward to try and change all of that, and became the chair eventually of the firm's Inclusion and Diversity Council, and tried to do my bit to raise awareness.
When was that, in terms of?
That was probably 2010, 2011, something like that.
So at the point when D&I was, gender was becoming talked about, it was entering people's consciousness.
Yeah, we set up some, what I think people call employee resource groups. We called them something different because we did. There was a sort of bottom-up element to it. But there was also an attempt to sort of think about it more strategically. But it was still, and I think, still true for many organisations, it was a sort of an add-on. It wasn't seen as being part of the overall business strategy. It was seen as, well, that's what those people over there do.
Yeah. So that's the women's network, and they go and talk sometimes.
and they talk to each other.
They talk to each other. Yeah. And that's how a lot of movements and organisations have started, through talking to each other. How did that progress whilst you were at Willis?
Well, I say, we set up this council which was designed to bring the business people, the leaders, into the conversation, and I think that went reasonably well, as far as to a certain extent. I think one of the challenges we had was a real lack of data. And in an organisation that's full of actuaries, it's still to this day, if you don't have data, it's kind of hard to really focus people's minds. So that became a real frustration for me, that the organisation just didn't have decent data on what its employees, the diversity of its organisation. And so I think that was a barrier to us really making effective change.
Yeah. But also that data of saying, of employee makeup is one thing, but persuading those white senior old men that diversity was a good thing is another challenge. That there's actually good business reasons for doing it. Did you focus on those at all?
Yeah, we did a lot around the business case, but I think it's Willis Towers Watson and many other organisations, particularly in the industry I work in, they're very successful businesses. Yeah. So saying, oh, you could be even more successful if you did this is perhaps, they pay lips. It's a danger that it doesn't really hit the mark.
Yeah.
And I think there is an assumption that people are not motivated by doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And certainly I found leaders who, they said, well, the business case is irrelevant. This is just what we should be doing.
Yeah.
And so you find your champions. And that was one of the key things, was to identify people who really got it.
Yeah.
And encourage them to share what they do differently, and hopefully they can persuade the naysayers.
Yeah. Okay, so then something happened and the diversity project was formed. Take me through that. What happened there? So
this was before I left Willis Towers Watson, and I was invited to lunch by an old friend of mine, Sarah Bates, who had actually done my MBA with back in the early 80s. She was then chair of St James's Place. And we had lunch just before Christmas in 2015 with another lady called Alexandra Haggard, who's now at Capital Group. And we were sort of wondering, we got onto the topic of where had all the women gone? Because when I first started out in my career in investment consulting, and similarly with Sarah as an equity portfolio manager, the industries were much, much smaller than they are now. But we had a sense that there were more senior women around as a proportion of the whole. We can't really prove that because we don't have the data, but we just had a sense that we hadn't made much progress in the decades since then. And we also got onto the topic of, would we even get a job in the industry these days, because of the way that particularly the larger firms go about recruiting. So they tend to, although it's changing, they tended to focus on particular institutions, particular subject disciplines. Whereas when I joined the industry and started researching the asset managers, I would meet fund managers who'd not been to university at all, or who had studied modern languages or history or all sorts of subjects. Whereas now there's much more focus on maths, finance, economics, and sort of related subjects. And that's also feeding through to self-selection by the students themselves. So unless you've studied those subjects, you probably don't think the investment industry is, even if you've heard of it, is for you. So we worried about the sort of narrowing of the cognitive diversity of the pipeline into the industry. But then we had a more positive thought, which was we knew individual firms in the industry and beyond were doing some really great work around inclusion and diversity. And we thought, wouldn't it be fantastic if people shared what they tried, what works, what doesn't work. And so what we did was we trotted off to see Helena Morrissey, now Baroness Helena Morrissey, who had started the 30% Club, which was all around getting more women on boards. And we said to Helena, who was then chairing the Investment Association, as well as being chief executive of a big asset management company, that it's great what you've done with the 30% Club, but we kind of need to get our own industries act together. And she completely agreed. And so that was really when the Diversity Project was born.
And what were the original, if you were sitting then, wind the clock back 5 or 6 years, and thinking about what you would have liked it to have been now, what achievements what successes you would have liked to have been celebrating. What were the original aims and goals?
Well, the overarching goal was to try and help create a more inclusive industry.
Yeah.
And we didn't really try and define it much more than that. I think people probably had different ideas as to how you might assess progress,
Yeah.
but we didn't put any hard sort of targets on anything. Because from the very beginning, we wanted this to be about a broad definition of diversity. So yes, gender, but also ethnicity, LGBT plus, disability, ethnicity, etc. And so it's quite hard to have targets for all of those things.
Yeah. Okay.
And we also recognized it was going to take a long time to shift the dial in an industry which tends to have quite low people turnover, particularly in the senior roles.
Yeah.
And therefore, we weren't going to change things overnight, but we
Yeah.
needed to sort of shift things in the right direction.
I'm obviously aware because I'm an ambassador for the Diversity Project, but there are these other work streams. Everybody quite often naturally thinks, you know, diversity is gender, but you've got the BAME work streams, the LGBT plus work streams. I've done some work with the disability work streams as well, which has been absolutely fascinating. But why is that important? Why are those other work streams so important? Social mobility, cognitive diversity. Why is that all important in the big scheme of things?
Well, I think we're all mixtures of things. So if I am a woman, I'll admit to that, but I'm also, you know, somebody who comes from, you know, was educated in a state school. I come from up north, so, you know, I've got a funny accent. So I think that we're all mixtures of things, and therefore it's important to try and capture all of that in when you're thinking about diversity. And at the time we set up the Diversity Project, that you know, a lot of firms had been focusing on gender diversity for 10 years and had made no progress.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of gender diversity fatigue going on. You know, oh, it's the women again moaning. And so actually by addressing a whole range of different dimensions of diversity, we've, I think, helped to engage more people in the conversation. So, you know, when we set, or when Gavin and Dawid set up hashtag Talk About Black, for example, nobody was talking about race and ethnicity within the investment industry. And people felt very uncomfortable talking about it because they didn't have the terminology. They thought they were, you know, they risk causing offense. So when they set up that groups to start with to raise awareness, they got a conversation going and engaged with people in a different way and got people thinking about, well, you know, the situation that Black people in the industry face. And I think that got people thinking about, well, maybe some other groups that might also struggle. So I don't see these as competing with each other. I think I think different people respond to different aspects of the diversity challenge, and we can help each other actually.
And how then, talking about, you know, other groups, you know, the industry is still predominantly made up of people that look like me, or probably a lot younger these days. You know, how is it important to get that, you know, white male involved? How are we going to do that? And why is it important?
Well, I think we can't do this on, we talked earlier about sort of echo chambers and people talking to one another. That's not going to move the dial. We need to kind of get everybody involved in the conversation and seeing how they can help. I think particularly it's important to get support from the leaders. They need to kind of be committing to change, and you know, they're the ones who set the tone in organizations. They're the ones with the budget to support better data collection or programs or whatever it is that needs to be done. So we need to have the leaders, who typically are still white,
Yeah.
male, middle-aged, involved, but it's the responsibility of everybody in an organization to help create a more inclusive culture all the way through, because it's about how people show up at work and what they experience on a day-to-day basis that makes the difference.
Okay, brilliant. And end the conversation on a high note, but before we go there, frustrations, what what needs to be done? How can you, what keeps you awake? What's the, what are the challenges?
I think one of the challenges is the sort of gap between people saying that they're committed to creating a more inclusive organization and what happens on a day-to-day basis. So there are still the gap there is still too wide. I think there was a study by Accenture last year that said that the leaders, it's 2/3 of leaders think that they're empowering their employees and creating an inclusive culture, but only 1/3 of employees agreed with them. Yeah. And I see that sort of just too often. So you've got leaders saying, oh, we're going to create a more inclusive culture. And then you hear about how people are treated when they ask for more flexible working arrangements. Yeah. Or you hear about the hiring practices where, a team leader requires all of his team to be physicists because he's a physicist and he thinks physicists are the best, the best people to be in a team. So there's just a big gap, I think, and that needs to be closed. And I think that's my, what I worry about most is that, people are telling a good story, but the reality on the ground is that the day-to-day experience for people is that it's not that inclusive.
I think we share many of the frustrations here, and they've been aired many times on this coffee break. I'd agree with you. There's huge amounts of talk. Everybody at leadership level says they're committed, and then you talk to people on the ground. We talk to our members, and actually the reality is often quite different. But let's not end there. Let's end on high notes. What are you most proud of of the achievements of the diversity project?
Well, I've already mentioned one, which was the sort of hashtag Talk About Black. I think that's been a fantastic achievement, and they're going on now. They've got mentoring circles for Black professionals. They're setting up an after schools program for Black school students to kind of learn about the industry and equip them for going on to maybe university or whatever. So that's been a fantastic set of achievements, really. I think the LGBT plus side of things as well, when Matt and I, Matt who runs LGBT and I sat down a few years ago, we couldn't think of anybody in the industry that was from the LGBT community. And if you haven't got role models, visible role models in an industry, it probably doesn't make it feel like a particularly safe place to be LGBT plus. So, they've, with our work, we partner with them. We now have, I think they've now got 500 role models and allies, and LGBT plus is in the conversation when firms organizations are talking about diversity. So I think awareness raising and having more visible role models has been a great achievement. We've also just gone from, I think we started with 10 members at the end of 2016. We've now got 70 member firms, and many of them have made it quite clear that diversity and inclusion is a strategic priority for them. More and more of them are including diversity and inclusion in their overall business strategy rather than seeing it as an add-on. So despite the comments about the gap between talk and reality, I think there are more great examples now of firms that are really committed and sharing those examples with their peers. So I think those would be 2 or 3 of the key achievements. I think the other one is on the socioeconomic diversity. This is an industry which is full of people who've had a private education, and there's nothing wrong with a private education, but it is danger of missing out on a whole set of talented people who don't have that kind of privileged background. And so 2 years ago, we established a relationship with Upreach, which is a social enterprise that looks to encourage smart students, but from less privileged backgrounds, to consider a career in professional services or finance. And we established an investment springboard program with them, with 100 students on it from different universities, less privileged backgrounds. Lots of them had been on free school meals, etc. And we've been working with Upreach, and then a number of those students, about half those students, have gone on to get internships in the industry. So really tangible things. So I think with the diversity project, it isn't just about sitting around talking about things, but it's trying to make things happen, and getting sort of change actually occurring in organisations rather than just sitting around talking about it.
Jane, I certainly feel that with the work that I'm doing on the recruitment stream, and hopefully some other work going forward with getting more men included, that it is about action. It's not about sitting around and talking, and that's the one thing that has really impressed me about the work. Listen, thank you. I'm sure everybody on the call will join me in congratulating you on the work that you've done and the work that you're doing, and would encourage you to continue to do it with the passion that you obviously do, and the rest of the team. I'm going to, at this point, open up so I just need to change my view so I can see people. First of all, round of applause. Thank you very much. Do we have some questions? We always have questions. Who wants to ask the first question to Jane? Anisha, how are you?
Good, thank you. Hope everybody's well on the call. Jane, thank you so much. I still believe this is a topic of mammoth task for somebody to take it up. Kudos to you and the team, so thank you for that. My question, actually, I've got 2. One is, I resonate with the point of hitting the fundamental roots, because I also come from a very small town. Banking wasn't even a concept anybody discussed at school. It was the traditional roots of careers. So if you can just talk a bit more regarding the work being done with the schools and colleges, or what should be done, because I feel like they need to build connectivity. I worked for 10 years for a bank, but they are known to go to like the Oxfords and the Cambridges, but I didn't go to an Oxford or Cambridge, and I managed to secure a position. But I want to encourage other, especially women, and women of like Indian descent as well. So if you can just talk a bit more about that, please.
Yes, certainly. I think there's a whole bunch of programs now sort of going on. And I think one of the things that the Diversity Project tries to do as well is act as an umbrella for a number of these different activities, so that we don't sort of duplicate each other's efforts, but we also support each other and build on it. So there are the Upreach program is very much focused on university students. But we're also exploring how can we reach kids earlier in their lives. So there's the hashtag Talk About Black After School Academy program. They're working initially with students at schools in the East End of London. And the idea is to offer them a sort of range of soft and technical skills that will equip them later in life, whatever they decide to do. And it's been put on hold a bit because of COVID, but I'm very optimistic that will pick up. So that's one great thing. I-2020, which is an investment association initiative, is all about trying to reach students at schools, primarily around London, but not exclusively so, and also at the sort of lesser known universities, the sort of non-Russell group perhaps, and educating them about the industry and encouraging them to consider a career in it, and working with organisations to offer apprenticeships and so on. Typically those students are going into sort of back or middle office roles, but not exclusively so. So I2020 is doing a fantastic job at sort of raising awareness, both at schools and universities. And then there's another organisation called GAIN. I don't know if you've come across them. Girls Are Investors, which is again doing a great job of reaching primarily young women at schools and universities with a view to explaining what the industry does, because hardly anybody knows what the asset management industry does. Never, you know, they're not necessarily that clear about finance, to be honest. So it's partly about education, but it's also about encouraging. So, yeah, I think there's a few different programs going on there. And our role, I think, is to help to publicize their work, support them with spokespeople, ambassadors, etc., and just leverage what they're doing.
Thank you, Jane. That's great. I wish that was existing when I was at school and college. That would have helped. Thank you. And just the second question I had was with regards to the smart working. So that's a hot topic these days, because from a diversity perspective, there's also a diverse way of working. So as you can see in the news, there's a lot about leading banks coming out, CEOs coming out to say this is an anomaly. We're going to go back to the normal ways of working. What's your take on that, and where do you actually see us settling?
It's really disappointing, the kind of reaction we've seen from some of particularly the bank organizations. I don't see it happening so much in the asset management industry. In fact, the opposite. There seem to be a number of organizations that are saying, look, we're never going to go back to 100% office working. We've proved that people can work wherever they want to work, and we will sort of find a way to facilitate that. So I'm hopeful that the industry I work in will kind of keep the best of the COVID experience and keep developing it. But I think there is a danger that we will sort of roll back into old habits. My main concern is that, you know, the white middle class men will all be in the office and everybody else will be working from home. And that could lead to problems with sort of level playing field for job assignments or promotions or whatever. So I think we're going to have to really work very hard to make sure that we don't have two sort of classes of employee, and that we make sure that we make hybrid working work for everybody. And that's certainly going to be a focus for the diversity project this year, is, you know, how do you make that work so that everybody, people aren't left behind because of the life choices that they've made or have to make.
Thank you. That's great to hear.
Thank you, Anisha. Thank you. Nolly, you've got your hand up.
I have, yes. Thank you, Mark. And thank you so much, Jane, for what you've just said to us today. I really appreciate it. So I've got a couple of points I'd like to make. So the first one is to complement the work that the Diversity Project is doing. It's absolutely amazing. I went to a Talk About Black event before the lockdown, and it was honestly the first time. I've worked in the industry for 5.5 years now, and it was the first time I'd actually seen people who looked like me, that are actually successful and working in the industry. So I live and I work in Essex, and it's a large enterprise, but obviously in Essex you've got a very small BAME community, and we certainly don't have any leaders who look like me. So actually seeing people like Marissa Hall talking about their experiences, how she has different textured hair, and the conversations around that was, and just seeing a room full of Black professionals in investment and asset management was just a first for me. So that was amazing and had a really big impact. So that's really great work you're doing. And the second question in regards with that is, when I left that event and I came back to work, as I mentioned, there's a very small BAME community within the area in general. And most of the events and the schemes that were happening are still happening as well, are very London focused. Is there an intention, or is there a way that to engage, because there's a lot of students here as well who are Black, and a lot of them just tend to end up saying, well, I'm just going to go work, in the city, or they just struggle to find their place within the industry and tend to think, well, we'll try maybe tech because finance is not an option for me. So how is there a way in which that you plan to spread or roll out all of these schemes to other communities outside of London? Because although they're London focused, you do get a lot of people who work in London from other smaller areas.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that some of the organisations like I2020 and GAIN are already kind of reaching beyond London. And I know that the Talk About Black team with their After Schools Academy, we're looking at other cities in the UK to kind of reach further into the rather than it just being so London focused. So yeah, it's a challenge though. Upreach is a good example of a program where students come from all over the country, and hopefully will find an opportunity to work in the city if that's what they want to do. But yes, it's a huge challenge to try and reach students all over the country. But I think there's definitely a movement in that direction.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nolly. Evelyn, hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I have a quick question, if that's all right.
Of course.
Jane, hi. Thank you. Really, really interesting. One thing that I'm obviously conscious of is we are talking about Black, we're talking about LGBT, great, STEMETS, Upreach, etc. It's fantastic work. What do you think will be the next theme from a diversity and inclusion perspective that investment management will probably take a look at? I'm really interested to hear about further down the line as well.
Yeah, well, I still don't think we've really cracked the cognitive diversity piece. And I think it's hard to define what that means, but I think there is still an assumption that if you recruit a few more women and a few more people of color and a few people from different backgrounds, you'll get cognitive diversity, different ways of looking at the world, different problem solving skills, etc. And I can't guarantee that. I used to work for an actuarial firm, as you know, and to be honest, the women actuaries, and I hope I don't want to offend anyone here, thought very similarly to the male actuaries. They weren't necessarily bringing cognitive diversity, but brought many other qualities. So I think that's going to be an increasing focus for all industries. Actually, is how do they ensure that they bring people with different knowledge bases, networks, skill sets, ways of thinking into their organization, and then provide an environment where they can thrive. Because if you kind of assume that you just need loads of physicists in your investment team, you've not really got the point. So I think that could be the next big area for people to focus on. I think the other thing is, what do we mean by inclusion, and what is an inclusive organization, and what is inclusive leadership? What do people need to do on a day-to-day basis to make an organization truly inclusive? And that's certainly a focus for the diversity project this year, is what do we really mean by that, and what does it look like? So I think those are two areas that we're working on this year.
Thank you. I think it's really important. I think the whole D&I spectrum, it's all about a belonging as well, isn't it, at a company? That's everybody that's employed by that business should feel that they are valued and they belong there and happy to go to work. So thank you.
Yeah, that they're listened to, really listened to, and their voices are heard, and they can have an impact on the organisation. I think that's absolutely right.
I think it's interesting where that conversation is going, because we started off talking about diversity, we then talk about inclusion, and I think now that we're increasingly talking about belonging, and inclusivity and belonging are very, I think, are very different things. Interesting. Karen, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to ask one quick question of Jane, if I may, which was, what can we do and how can we get involved in helping that agenda and the diversity project?
Well, there's lots of opportunities. We have an ambassador program, and Mark is one of our ambassadors. So we have over 100 people who have joined the diversity project in their own right, if you like, because they're passionate about the topic and want to make a difference. And our ambassadors do amazing work. They might join one of our work streams and help the work stream if it's something that they're particularly passionate about. It could be that they go out and just spread the word and take it back into their own organizations and challenge the way things are done locally. They might write articles or get involved with social media, etc. So there's lots of different ways for individuals who are keen to get involved to get involved, and then organizations like GAIN and so on are always looking for people who are willing to share their stories and get involved with kind of the outreach side of the work that they do. So lots of things that people can do as ambassadors or involved in some of the other partnerships that we get involved with.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Karen, I think there's some links on the Diversity Project website to where to go if you're interested in becoming an ambassador.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I find it hugely fulfilling. It's great. Kiki, you're posting all of the links to websites up there. So if anybody's interested in Upreach or GAIN or Black Women in Asset Management, have a look at the chat because the links are up there. Kiki, thank you very much for that. Thank you. Do we have some? I'm conscious of the time. Just a couple of final questions. Then I'm going to put you on the spot, Thomas.
Is he still there?
He is. He is. And you're on mute though, Thomas.
Apologies, I joined to offer you moral support. Jane, you didn't even know that I was coming along today. It's been really lovely to listen to you, Jane. Thanks, Mark, for the warm welcome.
That's brilliant. Thomas, there's a lot of talk about getting people that look like you and me involved, committed, spreading the word. If you're a leader, actually sort of not just talking about it, but taking action. I know absolutely nothing about you, apart from that you're obviously a good friend of Jane's, so you're obviously committed. What's your take on getting more men involved?
What's my take on getting more men involved? That's a very good question. I guess it takes, as Jane was saying, it takes action. It takes people like us then, Mark, to step forward and do the things that you are doing, especially if you felt, some sort of exclusion in the past. I mean, I was listening to Jane there talking about the fact that, she met people that hadn't been to university, for example, and that really resonated with me because I hadn't been. I left school and fell into a banking career, but then I left banking and became a fishmonger in the family business. And I've got to say that, for 14 years in that role, I kind of felt that I didn't really belong. I felt a bit excluded, and there were people like me who walked past me in suits and kind of just, were probably put off by the smell of my clothes, if I'm really honest. So, you know, I think, you know, if you've experienced anything like that, and I guess, you know, that might be in comparison to what other people have experienced, absolutely nothing, but that's enough for me, I guess, to want to help other people to feel included and that they belong. And I guess that's why I'm here today, to support Jane in this call.
Thomas, thank you.
Thank you. If I could just respond to that, I mean, I thanks, Thomas. I think trying to find a way of getting individuals to remember a time when they were excluded, which could have been, you know, they got booted out of the football team, or, you know, they were bullied at school, or whatever it was. I think if you can kind of make that connection and make people remember what it felt like to be excluded, it all starts to make more sense. So I think the more that we can, you know, share stories and hear from different people who've experienced different things, the easier that becomes. So I think, yes, getting the men to relate to this, which is why we're sort of keen to cover topics like mental health and so on, because quite often men have had tough times in their past, or they've got family that suffer from mental health problems and so on. That's maybe one of the ways that we can kind of get them to relate to this broader topic.
Indeed.
Jane, thank you. Thank you very much. We're at the end now. So I'm going to, everyone, join you in saying thank you very much, Jane. It's been brilliant. Keep up the great work. Keep the commitment, and we're all here with you, supporting you and encouraging you. And I'd encourage everybody, if they want to get involved with the diversity project, to go and have a look on the website and see what you can do.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Jane. You're brilliant. Just a little plug for next week's call. We've only got one event on next week, which is the coffee break, and we're being joined by Bianca Rima, who is talking about the 3 career pitfalls for women in male-dominated industries. So should be really interesting. Come along and join us. The week after that, on our coffee break, we're being joined by Kate Usher, who is going to be telling me all I need to know about the menopause. It's an area that I'm looking forward to learning about, because there is a gap in my knowledge there. So come along and join us for both of those, if you can. And there's other events going on. Don't forget, it's International Women's Day on Monday. And if you look at our LinkedIn page, or my LinkedIn page, you'll see a video that some of the people on the call here today have made. Sarah, Christelle, I can see, and Evelyn and Anisha. Thank you for doing those videos. They are brilliant. Look at my LinkedIn profile and go and like them and comment on them, because it helps spread the word. Thank you. Good afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you next week, if not before. Thanks very much. And Katie, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.